Plato said, "We can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men are afraid of the light."
In episode 7, we are going to tell you what Judges for Justice thinks might have happened in this case.
Welcome to episode 7 of Is Patty RORRER Innocent? We sincerely appreciate our viewers for following our documentary. No doubt you've formed your own theories about what may have happened. We hope our perspective aligns with yours, but if it doesn't, we'll strive to keep an open mind, and we hope you'll do the same with ours. Judges for Justice believes that Joann Katrinak and her infant son, Alex, left their home voluntarily at approximately 1:10 p.m. on December 15, 1994. There is no credible evidence they were abducted from the residence. And if that's true, it changes everything, because it would mean Patty RORRER, who had never met Joann, could not have intercepted her as she drove through the streets of Allentown. The odds are near impossible. We believe there weren't one, but two killers, a woman and a man. And if that's true, it casts serious doubt on Patty RORRER's guilt, because while it's barely conceivable she could drive over 500 miles to kill a woman she'd never met, it's virtually impossible she also persuaded a man to join her to help murder a young mother and her baby. Much of the evidence in this case doesn't fit. It doesn't work. Take the hair found in Joann Katrinak's right hand. It didn't belong to Joann, and it didn't belong to Patty RORRER. Who does the hair belong to? Neither woman smoked, so who left the cigarette butt near the bodies? The fingernail fragment found on Joann's chest didn't match Patty either. So who did it belong to? And if Walter Traupman actually saw Joann and her husband Andy arguing on Lloyd Street, then it's highly unlikely Patty RORRER had anything to do with this crime. She didn't know Joann and couldn't have intercepted her as she drove around the Allentown area. In the end, this isn't about what Judges for Justice believes. What truly matters is what you believe, especially if you live in the Lehigh Valley. Because public officials, police, and prosecutors may ignore outsiders, but they will listen to you, the people they serve. That's why your opinion matters. So let's begin. We'll start our review of the evidence with 2 hang-up phone calls. These 2 phone calls may hold the key to unlocking what really happened on December 15, 1994, the day Joann and baby Alex Katrinak were murdered. A major difference between the prosecution and the defense was the exact date Patty RORRER called the Katrinak residence and Joann hung up on her. Was it December 7th, 8 days before the murder, or December 12th, just 3 days before? At first, one tends to believe it doesn't really matter much, but you will see that we believe it explains a lot. We believe both phone calls happened, the one made by Patty RORRER on December 7th, and the second on December 12th by a different former girlfriend of Andy Katrinak. This is page 3 of an FBI interview report of Patty RORRER at her North Carolina home on December 22nd, 1994, 7 days after the disappearance of Joann and Alex. Patty told the FBI agent that she had returned from a team penning contest in Oklahoma on December 5th, 1994. The FBI report goes on to say, quote, "A day or two after returning home, she attempted to telephonically contact Katrinak, at which time his wife answered the phone. She asked who this woman was that was calling, and she responded, Pat. The wife then got angry and stated that Andy was married now and had a newborn baby and instructed her not to call the house anymore. The wife then hung up the phone on her." End quote. This screenshot is from the NBC Peacock show Murder in Lehigh Valley. Keith Morrison investigates. It shows a portion of Patty RORRER's long-distance phone records. The records show that Patty called the Katrinak residence in Catasauqua, Pennsylvania on December 7, 1994, 8 days before Joann and Alex disappeared. Here is Patty talking about her December 7th phone call in 2016. Notice that she mentions that Joann used some choice words, including the F word.
She said hello, I said hello, I asked for Andy, she said, oh, he's here or something like that, and then she kind of hesitated and said, who is this? And I told her who I was, and she got a little irate and used some choice words and told me they were happily married, and I said, I know, and she's like, when we have a new baby, and I was like, okay. Told me not to effing call her house anymore and slammed the phone down.
The main difference between Patty RORRER's account of the December 7th phone call and Andy Katrinak's account of the December 12th call is the language Joann used. Patty claimed that Joann used the F word when telling her not to call again, while Andy did not recall Joann using that word. We believe this distinction is significant. The use of the F word is something a person would remember. This report details an interview with Andy Katrinak conducted by Trooper Robert Egan on May 18, 1995, regarding the hang-up phone call. Andy told Trooper Egan that Pat RORRER called his residence on Monday, 12/12/94, between 9 and 10 p.m. This would have been just 3 days before Joann and Alex disappeared. The report states, quote, "The phone rang and Joann answered. Joann said, 'Who is this?' Then said, 'Why are you calling him? He's married and has a child.' Then Joann slammed the phone down. Joann told Andy it was Pat." End quote. Notice that Andy never claimed to have heard Patty RORRER's voice, nor did Joann mention her name during the call. It was only after Joann slammed the phone down that she told Andy it was Pat. This raises a question. Could a different former girlfriend of Andy Katrinak have been the one to call on the evening of December 12th? The book, Convenient Suspect, by author Tammy Mal, is an excellent resource about the case. Tammy points out, it's a sad reality that law enforcement must come to know victims better than anyone else, better even than the victims knew themselves. Joann Marie O'Connor was born in October 1968 as the youngest of 4 children to Sally and David O'Connor. She grew up in Hackettstown, New Jersey. After high school, she pursued training as a cosmetologist, but soon discovered she was allergic to many of the products used in hairdressing. Joann's older sister, Peggy, described her to the police as sensitive, trusting, naive, not street smart, and not a good judge of character. She also noted that Joann could be rude and flip in her speech to others. This Pennsylvania State Police interview with Michael Jack took place on March 23, 1995. Michael was married to Joann from October 16, 1991 until April 1992, when she left him. The report notes, quote, Jack described their marriage as awful. There was a lot of yelling and arguing. He has a temper, but Joann had one to match his. End quote. Jack told the police, quote, one time she grabbed him by the throat and he had her removed by the Mount Arlington Police Department. End quote. A former boyfriend of Joann's, identified as Mario C., was interviewed by law enforcement on March 21, 1995. On page 3 of the report, in the third paragraph, Mario describes Joann showing up at his residence in the early morning hours. The report further states, during some of these encounters, Joann exhibited extreme anger and on one occasion, trashed my place and I had to throw her out. It is worth noting that Joann was not hesitant to confront those she saw as romantic rivals. In the bottom paragraph of page 3, Mario C. states that after breaking up with Joann and having a new girlfriend named Mary Ann, Joann would continue to visit his residence. The police report states, quote, C. explained that Joann came to his residence on an occasion when Mary Ann was present, and Joann later indicated she did so purposefully to meet C.'s new girlfriend and see what she had that was so special. End quote. On April 3, 1995, just 6 days before Joann and Alex's bodies were discovered, Joann Katrinak's friend, Adrian Kalina, was interviewed by Trooper Egan and FBI Special Agent David Rowe. Adrian described Joann as a difficult employee, noting that she was defiant and unwilling to take orders from her boss. According to the police report, Adrian stated, Joann was not a good employee. She was very defiant. She would not take orders from her boss. Kalina advised, that is how Joann is. It's her way or no way. On March 23, 1995, Joann Katrinak's friend, Karen Devine, was interviewed by PSP Trooper Egan and FBI Special Agent David Rowe. This is Karen's second police interview about the case. Karen described Joann as an excellent bank teller, but a terrible employee, explaining that she refused to follow instructions and insisted on doing things her own way. According to the police report, Karen stated, she argued with the bank manager, and there was even an incident where she cursed and yelled at the bank manager. Joann had a bad temper. You are looking at an FBI report of Karen Devine's first interview. The interview was conducted on December 30th, 1994, 15 days after the disappearance. Please note the red underlined portion where Karen said that she believes that Joann left on her own. Why did Karen Devine think her friend left on her own? We are going to show you a segment from the Starz Network show, Wrong Man. In this 2019 Starz show, Wrong Man, Ira Todd, a former homicide detective, is interviewing Karen Devine by telephone. Karen Devine says she visited Joann Katrinak before Christmas to pay Joann some money back, $200. Joann told Karen Devine that her suitcase was packed and she was leaving her husband Andy after the holidays.
Did there ever come a time when you guys started back communicating?
Only when we visited before Christmas.
Okay.
I owed her $200, and I told her, I had the money. She says, just come here, I want to tell you something. We went into her bedroom.
And why did she want to go into the bedroom so you could pay her the money back?
Because she wanted to hide the money from Andy.
Okay, now, did she tell you why she wanted to hide the money from Andy?
Because she was putting money aside, to get away. She told me that she had a suitcase packed and she had money put aside and that after the holidays she was planning on leaving.
If Joann had been planning to leave Andy after the holidays, it's possible that their Lloyd Street argument on December 15th that Walter Traupman witnessed may have prompted her to move up her timeline. In addition to possibly accelerating her plans, the argument with Andy may have fueled her anger. Here, Joann's friend, Cindy Wired, provides what we believe is a fair and telling insight into her personality.
Andy didn't go out and party, didn't socialize. He's very laid back. He's a loner, and she wasn't like that. Joann was feisty. She was feisty.
What can we deduce from this crime location? First, the location, a wooded area 14 miles north of the Katrinak home, suggests that the killer was familiar with it. Second, we can infer that the victims and the killer were previously in a location that would have been incriminating had the victims' bodies been discovered there, prompting the killer or killers to first transport the victims here. If the bodies had been found at the Katrinak home, it would not have been incriminating for Patty RORRER. If Patty had broken into the home, there would have been no logical reason for her to transport the victims to this remote location. The killer, leaving his cigarette butt at the crime scene, his fingernail fragment on Joann's chest, and his hair clutched in her right hand, also all point to a crime that was not carefully planned in advance. The killer did not get up the morning of Thursday, December 15, 1994, with any plan to kill or harm Joann Katrinak. There were 6 dirty blonde hairs found on Joann Katrinak's driver's seat backrest. This is the only photo taken of the Q1 hair. It is the split end of one hair, and it appears to have blood on it. When Dr. Dedman of the FBI examined the blood on the Q1 hair in 1995, he determined it was blood, and Joann Katrinak could not be excluded as the source of the blood. It was later confirmed that the blood on the Q1 hair indeed belonged to Joann Katrinak. This pattern is consistent with medium velocity impact spatter, typically associated with blunt force trauma. The presence of Joann Katrinak's blood on the split ends of this dirty blonde hair indicates that this person with dirty blonde hair was in close proximity to Joann when she was being beaten. At trial, crime scene investigator Trooper Koya, who processed Joann Katrinak's car, from December 19 to 21, 1994, described the hairs he collected from the backrest of the driver's seat as dirty blonde and blondish hair. The Pennsylvania State Police sent the 3 Q1 hairs to the FBI lab on July 12, 1995. On August 28, 1995, Dr. Dedman of the FBI lab swabbed the blood-stained areas for analysis. In his notes, he described the Q1 hairs as several blonde-appearing hairs, consistent with Trooper Koya's earlier observations of their color. In his June 23, 1995 bench notes, PSP lab criminalist Thomas Jensen described the 3 unmounted Q1 hairs as light in color. This description aligns with the observations of both Trooper Koya and Dr. Dedman. In his June 23, 1995 lab notes, Jensen notes the end of one of the hairs had, quote, very frayed end with apparent blood particles lodged within the frayed end, end quote. In his notes, he has a drawing of the frayed end. Take a look at this drawing. It aligns perfectly with this photo of a Q1 hair. At Patty Rohrer's trial in 1998, Jensen testified that this hair was brown at the root and almost colorless at the tip. Jensen stated that the hair had been subjected to some sort of bleaching action as it was growing out. Here we see Jensen's trial testimony regarding the Q1 hair being colorless at the tip and having been subjected to some sort of bleaching action. In the upper right, we see the photo of the Q1 hair that appears to match Jensen's observations. The observations of Trooper Koya, who described the hairs as dirty blonde and blondish, align with Dr. Dedman's characterization of several blonde hairs. Similarly, Thomas Jensen's description of the hairs as brown at the root end and colorless at the tip, having undergone some form of bleaching action, further supports this consistency. Based on our common sense and experience, we can conclude that the hairs lifted from Joann Katrinak's car seat belong to a person with bleach blonde hair. It is reasonable to conclude that the killer, or at least one of the killers, was among the small group of people who knew where the Katrinaks lived, as Joann's car was abandoned near their home. Also, since the bleach blonde hairs were found on the driver's seat, it is reasonable to conclude that the person who left them was likely the one driving the car. Additionally, it is reasonable to conclude that the driver who had 9-inch bleach blonde hair was most likely a female. Given these criteria, 2 individuals come to mind, Patty Rohrer and Donna Long. We first introduced Donna Long in episode 2. On the left, we see a photo of Patty Rohrer taken on December 5, 1994, about 10 days before Joann and Alex Katrinak disappeared. In the center is a close-up of the split end of one of the Q1 hairs. On the right is an undated photo of Donna Long, an alias for a former girlfriend of Andy Katrinak. Based on a visual comparison, which head of hair seems more likely to have produced the split end hair found on Joann's car seat? Judges for Justice believes that there were actually 2 killers involved, one being the woman who left the 8 to 9-inch bleach blonde hair on the victim's car seat, and the other being the individual responsible for these 3 pieces of crime scene evidence: a cigarette butt, a torn-off fingernail fragment found on Joann Katrinak's upper chest, and an approximately 5-inch hair found clutched in Joann Katrinak's right hand. This image shows a close-up of Joann Katrinak's nails on the left and the fingernail fragment found on her upper chest on the right. In August of '95, PSP criminalist Thomas E. Jensen compared the torn-off fingernail fragment found on Joann Katrinak's chest with nail clippings taken from her right hand during autopsy. In his August 24, 1995 report, PSP criminalist Thomas E. Jensen wrote, "The fragment of fingernail, item 5, from Joann Katrinak's chest was found to differ from the fingernail and fingernail clippings, items 8 and 12, of Joann Katrinak in size, width of nail, and grooming. In plain terms, the fingernail fragment found on Joann's chest was not hers. It was wider than her nails and showed no signs of grooming." In his August 1, 1995 lab notes, Thomas Jensen compared Joann Katrinak's nail clippings with the fingernail fragment found on her chest. While his handwriting is difficult to read, we believe the note reads, "The nail clippings show an apparently well-manicured distal edge to the nails, with apparently fairly long nails. Comparison with the nail fragment from the chest, item 5, showed that fragment appeared to be from a larger, wider nail, and one that has a shorter, stubbier, protruding nail remaining." Translation: Joann Katrinak's nails were fairly long and well manicured, while the fingernail fragment was from a larger, wider nail with a shorter, stubbier tip. In other words, the fingernail fragment found on Joann's chest did not belong to her. Visually, we agree with Jensen's assessment from August 1, 1995. Joann Katrinak had well-manicured fingernails that were fairly long, while the fingernail fragment found on her chest appears to have come from a larger, wider nail with a shorter, stubbier, protruding edge. At Patty RORRER's 1998 trial, PSP criminalist Jensen contradicted his own 1995 findings, in which he had concluded that the fingernail fragment did not belong to Joann Katrinak. Instead, he testified that the fragment did belong to Joann, offering no explanation for his change in opinion. At Patty RORRER's 1998 trial, Thomas Jensen testified that the hair found clutched in Joann Katrinak's right hand did not belong to either Joann Katrinak or Patty RORRER. Additionally, we know that neither Joann nor Patty smoked, yet a cigarette butt was found at the crime scene. Considering all the evidence, we believe all three of these pieces of evidence belong to a man, distinct from the female who left the long, bleach blonde hair stained with Joann's blood on Joann Katrinak's driver's seat. This is the top of the November 30th, 1995 No Roots Attached FBI memo. We believe that the top paragraph, number 10, supports our two-perpetrator theory. It says, quote, "Victim's vehicle, dirt in undercarriage and on floor of back seat and floor in driver's position," end quote. The baby's car seat was in the front passenger seat when Joann's Toyota was found at 2 a.m. on December 16, 1994. We can see the police theory was the abductor sat in the rear seat behind Joann, who was driving. But the only way for that to have happened is that both the abductor and Joann must have left the Katrinak residence with muddy feet. There is no evidence at 740 Front Street of muddy footprints inside or outside the house. In the bottom paragraph of page 2 of the Joann Katrinak autopsy, it is noted that Joann had mud deposits in the tips of her shoes and in the jeans from the knee down. Also, it is observed that there is mud between the treads of her boots, indicating at some point she walked in muddy material. We think it is fair to say that on December 15, 1994, the ground in the patch of woods was muddy. We think that Joann's car was driven off the asphalt road and into the woods to avoid being seen by those driving by, and in so doing getting mud in its undercarriage, which as it dried turned to dirt. We think that once the car was driven into the woods, 3 adults, 2 perpetrators and Joann carrying her baby, got out of the car and onto the muddy ground. The 3 adults got mud on their shoes. Joann and the baby never got back into the car, but the other 2 did, one in the driver's seat to drive and one in their rear seat because the baby's car seat was in the front. Both perpetrators deposited mud on the car floor, which later turned to dirt. We believe this is more evidence that there were 2 killers. This is page 2 of a witness report from Veronica Katrinak, Andy Katrinak's mother. Veronica Katrinak was the last known person to have spoken with Joann. On page 1 of the report, Veronica stated that around 1 p.m. on December 15, 1994, she called her daughter-in-law, Joann Katrinak. Their conversation lasted less than 10 minutes, and before hanging up, Joann invited Veronica to go shopping with her, stating that she would be leaving right away to pick her up. It is reasonable to conclude that the call ended at approximately 1:10 p.m. This is page 2 of a report from witness Stacy Fulper, a neighbor of the Katrinaks. On page 1, Stacy stated that she observed Joann Katrinak loading her car at approximately 12:35 p.m. on December 15, 1994. As noted in this report, when Stacy came downstairs around 1:15 p.m., Joann's car was gone. Based on the Stacy Fulper and Veronica Katrinak witness statements, we believe that Joann and baby Alex left their home sometime between 1:10 p.m. and 1:15 p.m., a 5-minute window. This is a police photograph of Joann Katrinak's cut phone line. In the image, the line has been spliced back together by Andy Katrinak. In the early morning hours of December 16, 1994, Andy called the Catasauqua police to report that Joann's phone line had been cut. When officers arrived, they suggested that whoever cut the phone line would have likely left footprints in the basement's dirt floor. They planned to take photos and plaster impressions of the footprints. However, Andy told them not to bother, claiming he had already checked and didn't see any footprints when he discovered the cut line. We believe that Andy cut the phone line himself, likely as a way to encourage the police to take the disappearance of his wife and child more seriously. Andy failed 2 polygraph tests, and we suspect that this false report was one of the contributing factors. This cut phone line is the only real indication of any suspicious activity at the Katrinak residence. Otherwise, the house was immaculate, with no evidence of a struggle and nothing to suggest that anyone had been there to kidnap Joann and baby Alex. At Patty Rohrer's 1998 trial, the Commonwealth argued that Patty broke into the Katrinak basement and hid there, waiting. According to their theory, after Joann hung up her phone call with Veronica Katrinak, Patty cut the phone line, wiped away her footprints, then went upstairs and at gunpoint forced Joann and Alex into the car, all within the 5-minute window between Joann ending her call and Stacy Fulper noticing the car was gone. However, in this scenario, there's no logical reason for a perpetrator to cut the phone line, let alone wipe away their footprints afterwards. If Andy cut the phone line, there is no evidence of an abduction. The most logical conclusion is that Joann and the baby left home on their own, voluntarily, with no one else present. If Joann and baby Alex left home on their own, intending to pick up Veronica Katrinak, then Walter Traupman's report about seeing Andy and Joann arguing on Lloyd Street becomes even more credible and likely to have occurred. As we have emphasized multiple times, Walter Traupman was certain that he witnessed Andy Katrinak and Joann Katrinak arguing on Lloyd Street in the early afternoon of December 15, 1994. According to Traupman, he saw Andy on the hood of Joann's car, pounding on her windshield and yelling, "What do you mean it's not my kid?" This is Trooper Egan's report from November 27, 1995. In it, Egan misidentifies Walter Traupman as Walter Trautman, like the fish, rather than using the correct spelling of his name. Trooper Egan wrote this report in response to a formal complaint filed by Walter Trautman's attorney, who alleged that Egan physically assaulted Trautman at the police station October 31, 1995. Given that Egan likely had the attorney's complaint in hand, where Trautman's name was almost certainly spelled correctly, his error looks to be intentional. According to Egan, Trautman visited the police barracks up to 15 times, and each visit should have resulted in an official police report containing his correct name and age. Trooper Egan admits to receiving and then destroying a letter from Walter Trautman, a document in which Trautman's name would have been correctly spelled. We believe Egan didn't destroy the letter because it lacked investigative value, but rather because it held significant weight, strongly corroborating Trautman's account of seeing Joann and Andy Katrinak arguing on Lloyd Street. All this leads to 2 possibilities. Either Trooper Egan was grossly incompetent, or he intentionally misspelled Trautman's name to hide his identity and conceal his testimony. If Trooper Egan intentionally misidentified Walter Trautman, it suggests that he recognized Trautman as a credible witness for the defense. This, in turn, serves as further support that Trautman did, in fact, witness Andy and Joann arguing on Lloyd Street on the afternoon of December 15, 1994. If Walter Trautman's account is accurate, and we believe it is, it directly undermines the prosecution's theory that Joann and Alex were abducted from the Katrinak home. Instead, it strongly suggests that Joann and Alex left the house voluntarily, not as victims of a forced kidnapping. In his 2002 report, Walter Traupman states that both Joann's car and Andy's car were facing west on Lloyd Street. He also notes that when Joann drove off after the altercation, she went up Airport Road and made a right-hand turn going north towards the airport. When Joann left home that day around 1:10 p.m., her intent was to pick up her mother-in-law, Veronica Katrinak, and go shopping. However, we believe that after the argument with Andy, Joann, probably very upset, changed her plans. It's possible that, in an angry state of mind, Joann chose not to pick up her mother-in-law and instead set out to confront someone who had been troubling her, perhaps a former girlfriend of Andy's that continued to insert herself into their lives through visits and phone calls. What we know for certain is this: Joann never made it to her mother-in-law's house, and tragically, she encountered someone who killed her and Alex. Nearly every witness report about Joann Katrinak, whether from friends, an ex-boyfriend, or her ex-husband, describes her as having a fiery temper. She wasn't afraid to confront others and, at times, could become physically aggressive. As her friend, Adrienne Kalina, put it, Joann could be defiant. It was her way or no way. As the FBI says, behavior reflects personality. And that holds true not just for criminals, but for all of us. The way we act reveals who we are. Joann's personality could be combative and confrontational. Feisty is a fitting description. We're pretty sure that she and Andy argued on Lloyd Street, and during that argument, Joann antagonized Andy by suggesting the baby might not be his. That kind of remark cuts deep and reveals just how angry she was. We think this is a telling moment because, in this angry state of mind, we think Joann set out on a course that ended up provoking her killer. We agree with the Commonwealth on a key point. The person who left this hair on Joann Katrinak's driver's seat is a woman with bleach blonde hair and is the killer, or at least one of the killers, of Joann and Alex. However, we believe the evidence points not to someone living over 500 miles away in North Carolina, but to a local woman, Donna Long, who considered herself a good friend of Andy Katrinak. This is page 1 of an FBI witness report documenting an interview with the individual we refer to as Donna Long. The date is December 21, 1994, 6 days after Joann and Alex disappeared. And Donna Long is at the Katrinak residence, located at 740 Front Street in Catasauqua. During the interview, Donna states that she has known Andy for 4.5 years and considers herself to be a good friend of his. This is a Pennsylvania State Police interview with Donna Long, conducted on December 20, 1994, just 5 days after the disappearance of Joann and Alex on December 15. The interview took place at Donna's residence in Slatington, a town north of Catasauqua and about 4 miles from the wooded area where the bodies were later found. During the interview, Donna tells the officer that prior to Andy marrying Joann, she and Andy had a brief, intimate relationship. She also states that she last visited the Katrinaks about 2 to 3 weeks after baby Alex was born, which would place that visit around mid-September 1994, given that Alex was born on August 28. Her use of the word last implies she had visited the Katrinak home on earlier occasions. Perhaps the most revealing, or at least potentially significant, detail in the interview is Donna's statement that the last time she spoke with Joann Katrinak was 2 to 3 weeks before Joann disappeared. Presumably, this was a phone call, but given that Donna's friendship was with Andy, it raises the question, why was she speaking with Joann at all? If Donna Long had called to speak with Andy and Joann answered, we believe Joann may have reacted the same way she did with Patty RORRER, by telling her not to call again. That leads us to believe that Donna may have been trying to cover for herself. She may have called, been told not to call again by Joann, and, figuring that Andy might have mentioned the call to police, she admitted to speaking with Joann to get ahead of it. We know that Patty RORRER said she called Andy on December 7th, and she has the phone records to confirm it. It's unlikely she called again on December 12th. So, could Donna have been the old girlfriend, not Patty, who called on December 12th? The call Joann told Andy came from Pat? We can't say for certain, but it's a possibility. What matters is that Joann was probably angry and emotionally charged when she drove away from her argument with Andy. Perhaps she had already been thinking about leaving him after the holidays, but in that moment, she may have decided to move up her timeline and leave Andy before Christmas. It's possible that she chose to confront one of Andy's former girlfriends, and that could have been Donna Long. She lived in the Allentown area, knew where the Katrinaks lived, and had bleached blonde hair. We believe our second suspect left this cigarette butt near the bodies, this fingernail fragment on Joann Katrinak's chest, and the hair in her right hand. Because the fingernail is larger than Joann's nails, and it was not groomed, we believe the person was likely a male. The person who drove Joann's car into this parking spot would have needed to have been picked up. We think one of the drivers was Donna Long, the other, her father, a man we refer to by the alias Benjamin Long. Our viewers may remember this from episode 2, a list of crimes committed by Benjamin Long during the 1990s when he was in his 50s. He was convicted of harassment, stalking with intent to cause emotional distress, and stalking with intent to instill fear, among others. To us, these crimes reflect a hostile individual with poor impulse control. And given his age, we believe mental illness played a role in his behavior. Benjamin Long's criminal history extended well into his 60s and 70s. In fact, he served prison time in his 70s for being a felon in possession of a firearm. This May 22, 2007 article from the Morning Call highlights some key concerns. As noted in the red box, Benjamin C. Long, 68, who was found to have a mental illness, has tried to investigate crimes on his own, has a history of harassment, reckless endangerment, and stalking, and implicated one of his victims in a homicide, according to police. In episode 2, we discussed how individuals with mental illness are more prone to psychological projection, accusing others of the very behavior they themselves are engaged in. Does this mean Benjamin Long was Joann Katrinak's killer? No. However, we believe that Donna Long and her father, Benjamin Long, are credible persons of interest, individuals who, to our knowledge, have never been investigated by police. We believe they should be. Fearing for his missing wife and son, Judges for Justice believes Andy cut Joann's phone line, not to deceive, but to push police into action, to get them searching faster. This is page 2 of Veronica Katrinak's witness statement. We believe Joann and baby Alex left home around 1:10 p.m. right away, just as she told her mother-in-law. They left voluntarily, not kidnapped, on their way to Bethlehem to pick up Veronica and go shopping. The blue line shows the route Joann likely took from her home in Catasauqua, headed to 807 Wild Street in Bethlehem, where Andy's parents lived. About halfway along the route, near the AMC Classic Allentown 16 Theaters, is Lloyd Street. We believe that Andy Katrinak saw Joann and interrupted her trip, getting her to stop on Lloyd Street. That's where Walter Traupman said he saw Andy Katrinak pounding on Joann's windshield, shouting, "What do you mean it's not my kid?" We believe Joann Katrinak was angry when she drove away from her argument with her husband Andy on the afternoon of December 15, 1994. Rather than picking up her mother-in-law as planned, we believe she changed course and drove off to confront Donna Long. Joann Katrinak's decision to confront Donna Long aligns with a pattern recognized by FBI profilers as an argument conflict murder, where a personal dispute escalates into sudden and lethal violence. In confronting Donna Long, Joann couldn't see that she was going to have the misfortune of crossing paths and igniting a volatile and impulsive offender. That being Benjamin Long, Donna's father, an impulsive and mentally ill individual who, in the heat of the moment, may have tried to defend his daughter and resorted to violence. In killing Joann, Benjamin may have left his fingernail, hair, and a cigarette butt at the scene. We believe the confrontation that may have occurred between Joann Katrinak and Donna and Benjamin Long took place at a location that would have been incriminating, either Donna's residence or Benjamin's nursery business. At gunpoint, Benjamin may have forced Joann into the back seat of her own car, while the baby remained strapped in his car seat up front, and Donna drove the vehicle. If Joann was screaming or resisting, it's possible that Benjamin struck her with the butt of the pistol, causing blood spatter, some of which may have landed on Donna's hair as she drove. During the autopsy, it was noted that Joann's right shin showed areas of broad purple discoloration, consistent with blunt force trauma. Benjamin Long, a landscaper, was known to wear steel-toed boots. We believe he kicked Joann in the shin in an attempt to force her to her knees. The mud found on her knees further supports the likelihood that she had been on her knees. Her bent legs indicate that she was shot while on her knees and she fell back. We believe that after forcing Joann to her knees, the killer began striking downward at her with a .22 caliber revolver in his right hand. We think it was a revolver because no shell casings were found at the scene. At some point, Joann lashed out at the attacker, grabbing one of his hairs, which is later discovered clutched in her right hand. With Joann being beaten on her knees, Joann was cradling baby Alex in her right arm and used her left hand and forearm to try to block the blows. During the assault, the killer catches one of his fingernails on Joann's gold bracelet, snapping the bracelet off and tearing his fingernail. The bracelet fell to the ground, and his torn fingernail landed on Joann's upper chest. Then, possibly out of frustration or rage, the killer shot Joann in the face, causing her to fall backward onto the ground and on top of the bracelet, which was later found underneath her body. While on the ground, we believe the killer then kicked her repeatedly with steel-toed boots, delivering brutal blows to her face, head, and body, resulting in a broken nose, a fractured middle finger, and a total of 19 blunt force injuries. At autopsy, Joann's battery-powered watch was found stopped at 3:50. Since these batteries typically last at least a year, we believe the watch was damaged during the assault, likely when Joann was kicked, causing it to stop around the time of her death. Given that sunset in this area of Pennsylvania is around 4:35 p.m. on December 15th, it would still have been daylight at the time. This suggests that the killer or killers may have panicked, unsure of what to do next. They may have decided to lay low and wait for nightfall before taking further action. In the meantime, one of them likely lit a cigarette to calm their nerves. After nightfall, the two killers return to Joann's car. One of them takes the driver's seat, leaving mud on the floor that later dries into dirt. The other rides in the back seat, since baby Alex's car seat is occupying the front passenger side, and also leaves mud on the back seat floor. They carefully leave the murder scene and drive to a location where they had previously left another vehicle. The person in the back seat gets out, takes the second vehicle, and follows Joann's car to McCarty's Bar, 150 yards from the Katrinak residence, where it is left parked. After the car is abandoned, the driver is picked up by the second killer, and they leave the scene together. The Commonwealth would have you believe that none of this evidence matters, that the 5-inch human hair found clutched in Joann's right hand had nothing to do with her murder, that the cigarette butt lying near the bodies was a meaningless coincidence, that the fingernail fragment found on Joann's chest was her own, not torn from the hand of a man who attacked her, and that Walter Traupman, who said he saw Joann and Andy arguing the day she vanished, was simply mistaken. Well, maybe. Anything is possible. But let's ask the real question. Is it probable? We believe the truth is far more likely and far more damning that the hair in Joann's hand came from the man who killed her, that he smoked a cigarette while standing near her body, that his fingernail was ripped away in the violence that ended her life, and that Walter Traupman did see what he said he saw, Andy and Joann in a heated argument, before Joann drove off, angry and determined to confront someone from Andy's past. So that's our view of what we believe happened. But the full, unvarnished truth, only the killers know that. And perhaps the most important consideration of all is what you, the viewer, believe happened.
This ends episode 7. In episode 8, we will map out a possible path to justice.